I had just stepped out of the Uber when I saw the soft golden glow of the glass ember ahead of me. It was one of those high-end restaurants with polished windows and valet parking, the kind of place I passed by on my way to cheaper spots. Tonight, though, it was where my older sister Rachel had chosen to host a family holiday dinner. I wasn't even sure what holiday we were celebrating, nothing marked on the calendar, but her message had been unusually warm. "Come join us," she'd written. "A small family dinner. Just us. Dress nice." There was a slight flutter of something like hope in my chest when I read it, something I hadn't let myself feel in a while when it came to Rachel. I held a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon in one hand, not the most expensive in the shop, but enough to make a quiet statement. The kind of wine that said I'm doing well. I thought this mattered. I even took extra time to wrap it in a gold foil bag and tie it with twine. That kind of detail Rachel usually noticed, though she rarely commented. Inside, the restaurant was dim and elegant, with soft jazz humming in the background and tall glass partitions separating the private dining rooms from the main floor. A hostess greeted me with a rehearsed smile and offered to take my coat, her hands delicate, manicured, and distant. I followed her through a narrow hallway, catching glimpses of tables set with flickering candles and families laughing over silverware and shared appetizers. And then we reached the private room. Rachel was standing near the doorway, dressed in a dark forest green silk blouse, her blonde hair pinned up in a careful twist, every strand in place. She looked effortlessly put together as always. Behind her, I could see the long table already mostly full. My parents at the head, our cousin Elise, her husband, their 2 teenage sons, and Rachel's husband Brian, seated and mid-conversation. The room was already loud with overlapping voices and the occasional clink of cutlery. Rachel's eyes met mine with a flash of something unreadable. Surprise? No, it was more like calculation. A polite smile appeared as she stepped forward to greet me. "You made it," she said, her voice smooth but brisk. She leaned in to give me a light kiss on the cheek, the kind that didn't quite touch skin. "Of course," I said, lifting the bottle slightly. "Thought I'd bring something nice." "Oh, great," she replied, taking the wine without really looking at it. She handed it off to a server before turning back to me. "Listen, would you mind sitting with the kids? There's not much space left at the main table." I paused, not quite understanding. "With the kids?" I asked, glancing past her. There was a smaller round table near the windows, already set with 3 place settings. I recognized Elise's boys, plus Rachel's youngest daughter Ava, who was 5 and already swiping at her tablet with a tiny, sticky finger. Rachel shifted slightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's just, we had a bit more of a turnout than expected. The main table's full. I figured you'd be okay with it." I tried to keep my face from cracking. It wasn't that I minded kids, I liked them generally. But this was a formal dinner, one where I dressed up, bought wine, and showed up early because I thought, stupidly, that this might be some kind of real reconnection. Sitting with the kids felt like being demoted. It felt like being asked to observe the family instead of being part of it. Still, Rachel was watching me, expecting me to just nod and comply. So I did. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "No problem." She gave a brief nod and turned back to the main table, already done with me. I walked slowly toward the kids' table and took the empty seat, my dress catching slightly on the edge of the chair. Ava didn't even glance up from her screen. The boys gave me a distracted nod and went back to whatever game they were whispering about. I placed my hands in my lap and looked toward the long table where everyone was laughing, already pouring wine, breaking bread, and slipping into that easy rhythm that families find when they're close. I watched as Rachel leaned in to whisper something to our mom, who glanced briefly in my direction with an unreadable expression. The server brought a glass of water and a menu, and I nodded my thanks. My seat was near the window and I looked out at the dark street, the passing headlights of cars, the reflections of warmth I didn't quite feel. It wasn't the seat itself that stung. It was the message in it. A quiet, polite distancing. A way of saying, you're not really part of this. Not the way we are. And as the hum of laughter swelled behind me, I wondered how many more invitations I'd need to accept before I stopped expecting them to mean something. I sat stiffly in the small plastic chair, its hollow legs wobbling ever so slightly each time I shifted my weight. The table in front of me was covered in a glossy vinyl cloth printed with cartoon dinosaurs, brontosauruses and triceratops smiling in garish primary colors. Folded napkins, also dinosaur-themed, sat beside mismatched plastic cups, one of which had already spilled slightly and was leaving a sticky ring of apple juice near the edge. The smell of fried food and disinfectant drifted in from the kitchen doors just a few feet away, which swung open every few minutes as waiters bustled through carrying trays meant for the other table, the real table. The one where the adults sat. I glanced over again, my eyes drawn despite myself to the long table across the room, gleaming under a soft overhead light, set with real linen, polished silverware and tall glasses of red wine. My parents were there, side by side, leaning slightly toward my brother Alex and his wife, who both looked perfectly comfortable in their tailored clothes and measured smiles. My father's deep voice rumbled low as he gestured toward something Rachel had just said. She was radiant in a way that drew attention without asking for it, one hand resting lightly on her belly as she spoke. The whole table seemed suspended around that hand, around what it meant. "She's due in April," Brian said, loud enough for even me to hear from across the room, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "We just got the latest ultrasound. It's a girl." Everyone at the table responded in overlapping congratulations. My mother clutched her hands to her chest, her face breaking into a soft, delighted expression I hadn't seen in years. Alex raised his glass. Even my father smiled, the proud, quiet kind he usually reserved for graduation ceremonies or unexpected bonuses. Rachel sat there with a practiced humility, shaking her head slightly as if to say, "Oh, stop," while soaking in the praise as naturally as breathing. I felt the distance between us stretch wider. Not just across the room but through years. Through every carefully worded text, every call that went to voicemail, every family dinner I wasn't invited to because, as Rachel had once put it, "We just thought you'd be busy with your work stuff." I looked around my table. Ava, her cheeks flushed and eyes fixed on the screen of her tablet, was watching some animated video with tinny audio bleeding through. Scott and Bella, Elise's kids, were half-heartedly arguing over whose turn it was to use the green crayon from a broken set lying between them. The plastic surface of the table was sticky where juice had spilled and someone had tried to wipe it up with a napkin, leaving behind a smear of grape-purple streaks. I looked down at my lap at the smooth, dark fabric of the dress I had bought just for tonight. It was simple but elegant, something I thought might strike the right balance. Not trying too hard, not underdressing. I had even taken the time to straighten my hair, to add a little mascara, a little lip color. I wanted to look like someone who mattered. But I was here. At the dinosaur table. The server returned with a plate for me, macaroni and cheese, cut-up chicken tenders, and a side of ketchup carefully swirled into a heart shape. I stared at it, speechless. I hadn't ordered this. No one had asked. It was the default, I suppose, for anyone seated at the kids' table. My mouth went dry. I looked back at the adult table. Real plates. Medium-rare steaks. Roasted asparagus. Garlic mashed potatoes in porcelain serving bowls. Wine poured with ceremony. Someone toasted to the baby, Rachel's second, and my mother teared up again. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed her hand, and everyone smiled like the moment had been scripted just for them. No one looked in my direction. No one even glanced to see whether I'd received my food or needed anything. Not my mother, not my father, not Alex. Certainly not Rachel. It was like I wasn't even in the room, like I was a child sent away to play while the grown-ups handled the important parts of the evening. A sick heat crawled up the back of my neck. I tried to swallow it down but it clung to my throat like glue. I picked up my fork and poked at the macaroni. It was congealed at the edges, pale yellow and slightly rubbery. The smell of ketchup hit me in the face, too sweet, too strong. I wasn't hungry anymore. Every instinct in me told me not to make a scene, not to draw attention. That's how we were raised. Rachel had always played the family politics better than I had. Always knowing what to say, what not to say. Always knowing how to keep control. She could deliver a perfect insult wrapped in a compliment and make you thank her for it. I shifted in my seat, feeling the plastic creak beneath me again. I caught sight of myself in the reflective glass near the kitchen doors. Just a faint outline, blurred and smudged by the indoor light. I looked like a guest at someone else's event. No, not even that. I looked like a placeholder. Like someone they had to invite but didn't want to seat at the main table. I could hear my mother's laugh now, bright and unguarded, floating across the room as she talked to Rachel about baby names. "You always pick such elegant ones," she said. "You've always had taste." I wanted to disappear. Not leave, not storm out, not cry, not slam anything. Just quietly vanish into the floor or into the shadows of the room. I didn't want anyone to see my face, didn't want them to know how small I felt. How exposed. Because the worst part wasn't that I'd been asked to sit at the kids' table. The worst part was that no one seemed to think it was strange. I sat perfectly still, the plastic chair beneath me groaning softly every time I shifted the slightest bit, though I tried not to move at all. My plate was still full, untouched. The chicken tenders growing cool, the macaroni beginning to harden at the edges, the ketchup heart smudged and slowly collapsing. Around me the children chattered, oblivious, immersed in their own world of half-finished coloring pages and jokes that made them squeal with laughter. And yet my ears were fixed on the table across the room, where Rachel had just dropped her next perfect little bomb. "It's official," she said, smiling like it was nothing. "We're expecting again." A second of silence followed. Then an eruption. My mother clapped first, both hands together, her gold bracelet jangling against her wrist. Face lit up like someone had just handed her a trophy. My father followed, beaming, reaching across the table to pat Brian's shoulder. Alex raised his glass again, his wife placing a hand over her heart, the whole table shimmering with congratulations. Even Elise leaned in, her face soft, her voice high with admiration as she said something I couldn't quite hear but could guess the shape of. Everyone smiling. Everyone celebrating. No one looked at me. No one turned to check if I had heard. No one thought to include me, to glance in my direction, to ask what I thought, how I felt, what I might want to say. It was like I was behind glass. Not even across the room, but in some other dimension where my presence was technically acknowledged, but my existence didn't require any engagement. My fingers curled into my lap, pressing against the fabric of my dress. It wasn't just this dinner. It was never just one moment. It was years. Years of watching Rachel dominate every room with that serene, composed confidence she wore like perfume. Years of being introduced as the younger one, our Maya, always with a tone that implied I hadn't quite arrived yet. Years of quietly succeeding and just as quietly being ignored. I had a career at one of the most competitive creative agencies on the West Coast. Vision Spark Creative was no joke. Our firm handled campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, ran national rebrands, turned obscure startups into household names. I had led 3 major launches in the past year alone. Just 3 months ago, I'd been promoted to senior art director. I had my own office, a team, clients who asked for me by name. My name. Not someone's sister. Not someone's daughter. I paid my rent. I paid my bills. I bought my own health insurance. I managed my schedule, I filed my taxes, I made sure my fridge wasn't empty. I did it all. Without anyone's help. Without ever borrowing a cent. Without even asking for advice. Because when I'd been talked down to, told I was making things more complicated than they needed to be, told that design wasn't a real career unless you were working for Disney or Google. Rachel had laughed once when I told her we'd just landed a campaign for a sustainable fashion brand. That's cute, she'd said. So you make ads for recycled t-shirts now? It wasn't just her. My mother still sent me job listings sometimes, positions at local schools or nonprofits, jobs she thought might be more stable. My father had once asked over Thanksgiving if I was still doing that graphics thing. Like I was printing flyers at Kinko's. They never asked about my work beyond that. Never asked what it meant to lead a team, to pitch creative to a boardroom of skeptical executives and walk away with a signed contract. Never asked what it felt like to hold a campaign I had built from scratch in my hands, to see it on a billboard downtown. They didn't even know that I'd been featured in an industry magazine last spring. Full-page spread, photo and everything. But Rachel said the word pregnant, and they lit up like the 4th of July. It didn't matter that it was her 3rd child. It didn't matter that she already had everything. The house in the suburbs, the husband who always arrived 5 minutes late but wore a suit and nodded at the right times, the car with the leather seats, the Instagram-perfect kitchen. She was doing what they understood. What they valued. What counted. She was building a family. A legacy. A future. And I was just building, what? A portfolio? I stared down at the table, the cartoon dinosaurs grinning up at me like it was all a joke. Maybe it was. Maybe the joke had always been that no matter how far I climbed, no matter how hard I worked, no matter how adult I became to them, I'd always be the girl with the sketchpad in the corner, doodling in the margins while the real world happened elsewhere. Rachel's voice floated through the room again, soft and glowing. We haven't told many people yet, so this is special. Yes. I could see just how special it was. The kind of special that required a private room in a luxury restaurant. The kind that got you applause, champagne, a whole evening arranged around your announcement. I had brought wine. I had dressed up. I had tried, again, to be seen. And yet here I was. At the dinosaur table. Next to a 5-year-old with yogurt on her chin. I clenched my jaw, blinked hard and forced myself to breathe. The lights above me buzzed faintly. The kitchen doors swung open again and hit the wall with a soft thud. I watched another server pass behind me carrying a steaming tray. I could smell rosemary and butter. And still no one looked my way. I pulled my phone out slowly, keeping it low beneath the edge of the table so none of the adults, none of them could see. My fingers moved quickly, practiced from years of typing out emails on the go, edits in the back of Ubers, feedback sent from conference rooms and hotel lobbies. This time the message was short. Just a few words to Lauren. Emergency call in 20 minutes. Save me. Lauren would know what that meant. She was one of the few people in my life who didn't need the full backstory to understand the look on my face, the tone in my text. She'd seen me leave networking events early, dodge conversations at weddings, survive Thanksgiving at my parents' house by excusing myself to take a work call, and then spending 20 minutes just breathing in my car. She knew what family dinners could do to me. Knew how it felt to be the successful one no one took seriously. I pressed send, then turned the phone face down and slid it next to my plate. 20 minutes. I could wait 20 minutes. But even as I sat there, pretending to engage with the kids, pretending I wasn't watching the other table out of the corner of my eye, something inside me shifted. Not a sharp movement. Not anger. Something quieter. Like tiredness but deeper. A kind of stillness that settled over me like heavy snow. Why was I waiting for permission to leave? Why was I sitting at a plastic table next to kitchen doors, with a paper napkin printed with T-Rexes in my lap, dressed like a woman who belonged somewhere important, pretending not to care that no one at the other table had said my name once? Why was I asking for an out when I could simply take it? I looked up. No one at the long table noticed me. They were deep into another round of baby talk now, passing around Rachel's ultrasound photo like it was a work of art. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye. Brian was telling some story about baby kicks. The whole room glowed with gentle joy that seemed to wrap itself around every chair, except mine. And maybe that was the key. They wouldn't notice if I left because they had already trained themselves not to see me. I reached again for my phone and opened the restaurant's app, a sleek system I'd noticed when I walked in. The hostess had mentioned it offhandedly when she took my coat, that you could pay your share of the bill directly through the QR code at the table, no need to flag a server. Just scan tap done. I glanced down and there it was, a laminated card stuck to the side of the child-sized table, right next to the sad pile of broken crayons. I scanned it. The app opened. The menu appeared. I selected my meal, even though I hadn't touched it, and added a tip. Generous because the staff didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of my mood. Then I tapped the payment icon. A little chime played as it processed. That was it. No arguments. No excuses. No whispered, "I have to go," or awkward stammering about work emergencies or fake expressions of regret. I didn't need an escape call. I didn't need drama. I just needed to stand up and leave. So I did. I rose slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress down over my legs, careful not to bump the table. The kids didn't look up. Ava was still on her tablet. Scott and Bella were now drawing spirals on the paper placemats, bored and oversugared. I picked up my clutch, slung my coat over my arm and took one last look toward the long table. So no one looked my way. Rachel was laughing again, one hand on her belly like she was posing for a maternity shoot. My father was leaning toward her, saying something too softly for me to hear. My mother was nodding at whatever it was, her eyes fixed on Rachel like she had hung the stars. And then I turned. I walked slowly past the glass wall that separated the private room from the rest of the restaurant. No one from the main floor gave me a second glance. I didn't pause. I didn't fix my expression. I just walked straight toward the front door, heels clicking lightly on the polished wood floor. Outside, the air hit me with a quiet chill, clear and cool in the night. The city hummed, distant and indifferent. A few people passed me on the sidewalk, coats pulled tight, voices low. I stepped into the flow of it, my phone buzzing once in my hand. A message from Lauren. Calling now. Want me to make it dramatic? I smiled. For the first time that night I actually smiled. No need, I typed. Already gone. The cold air wrapped around me like a clean sheet pulled straight from the night, crisp and silent. The streetlights pooled yellow on the sidewalk as I walked away from the soft clinking of glass and the echo of muted laughter still leaking through the restaurant's walls. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I walked with a calm I hadn't expected, as though each step away from that room was a step closer to something real, something solid. Something mine. The Uber was already waiting, headlights low, engine purring like it had been holding its breath. I slid into the back seat and gave the driver a quiet nod. We didn't talk. I watched the city blur by outside my window, all twinkling lights and empty offices, the quiet geometry of buildings towering above us like indifferent witnesses. The kind of night that could fold in on itself if you let it, erase everything you didn't want to carry home. When I stepped into my apartment, I felt the familiar hush settle around me, the walls still and welcoming, the kind of silence that didn't ask for anything. I dropped my coat over the back of the chair and kicked off my heels one by one. The space smelled faintly of bergamot and clean linen from the candle I'd forgotten to put out earlier. It felt warm and alive in a way the restaurant never had. I walked into the kitchen and pulled out the bottle of wine I had planned to bring to the table, the second one, a richer, heavier red I hadn't thought they'd appreciate. I uncorked it slowly, the pop echoing like punctuation in the quiet. I poured a generous glass and leaned against the counter, the stem cool between my fingers, the liquid deep and dark like ink in the low light. That's when the first message came. Where did you go? I watched the notification fade on the screen and didn't touch it. Another buzz. That was rude, Maya. Then another. You left without saying a word. Seriously. I sipped my wine. It was smooth, full-bodied, exactly what I needed. The kind of wine you pour when you're no longer pretending. Then came Rachel's name. You made this really uncomfortable for everyone. This was supposed to be a celebration. And finally, my mother. You embarrassed us. You ruined Rachel's night. I stared at the screen, watching the words stack up like stones, heavy and cold. The guilt tried to creep in, as it always did. That trained instinct to apologize, to explain, to make myself smaller so they could stay comfortable. I felt it rise in me like muscle memory, that familiar pull to make peace at my own expense. I was tired. Tired of measuring my worth against their silence. Tired of earning milestones no one cared to ask about. Tired of being spoken to in half sentences and nods, like I was a child playing house instead of a woman who had built a life on her own terms. I set the wine glass down gently, picked up my phone and opened a new message. My fingers didn't hesitate. I'm a grown woman. I have things to do. Enjoy your evening. I sent it. Then, slowly, deliberately, I held down the power button on my phone until the screen went black and the buzzing stopped. The silence afterward wasn't hollow. It wasn't loneliness. It was a silence filled with my own breathing, the sound of the radiator humming, the soft tick of the wall clock. The silence of a place that didn't question my presence or demand an apology. I picked up my wine, walked to the couch and sank into the cushions like I belonged there. Because I did. The morning light was soft when it came through the blinds, filtered and pale, catching on the rim of the now empty wine glass I had left beside the couch. I stretched, still wrapped in the warmth of the silence I had chosen the night before. My phone was still off, exactly where I had left it, face down and undisturbed. For once, I didn't feel the usual urgency to turn it on, to reattach myself to the noise. I made coffee slowly, savoring the rich scent as it filled the kitchen, grounding me in something ordinary and mine. It wasn't until late afternoon that I left the apartment, dressed casually in dark jeans and a sweater, my hair pulled into a loose twist, the kind of outfit that said I wasn't trying but still looked like I knew who I was. I walked through the city with no real destination, just a need to move, to feel the air on my face and remember that there was more to the world than the polished glass walls of a restaurant where I had once again been made to feel small. I ended up in Midtown, wandering into a local coffee shop I used to frequent during my early freelance days, back when I'd sit for hours with my laptop and pitch ideas to agencies who would never remember my name. I hadn't been there in years, but the smell of burnt espresso beans and vanilla syrup was exactly the same. And then I heard my name. Why, I turned and there she was, Natalie Vargas. We had shared a few courses back in college, late-night critiques and studio labs, takeout boxes balanced on sketchpads, group projects that somehow always turned into two people carrying the rest. She looked exactly the same but sharper, more composed. Her dark curls were pulled back into a neat bun, and her tailored coat screamed New York confidence. She smiled, that wide, open grin I remembered, and pulled me into a hug before I could fully process her presence. I thought that was you, she said, stepping back and giving me a once-over, in the way people do when they're both surprised and pleased to see someone from their past thriving. You look amazing. God, it's been forever. We grabbed a table by the window, coffees in hand, and fell into conversation so easily it almost felt rehearsed. We traded updates, her move to San Francisco, my work at Vision Spark, the clients, the campaigns, the late nights. But unlike so many conversations I'd had with people from my past, Natalie listened, actually listened. Her eyes sharp, interested, nodding at the right moments, laughing when something deserved it, asking real questions. When I mentioned my promotion, she didn't nod politely and move on. She leaned in. Senior art director at Vision Spark? That's impressive, Maya. I remember your portfolio back in school. It was miles ahead of everyone else. I'm not surprised. I blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the compliment, so clean and direct. Not softened with irony, not followed by a dig, not said through a mouth half full of judgment. Just real. Then she said it. Listen, this is kind of crazy timing, but Omnivault's looking for a new creative director. Our current one's relocating to London in January. We've been trying to find someone with both a strong visual sensibility and actual leadership instinct. Someone who gets both the art and the strategy. When you said Vision Spark, it clicked. I think you'd be a perfect fit. I stared at her for a second, half expecting the catch. But there was none. Just Natalie, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup, eyes steady. It would be a big move, she continued, but it comes with complete creative freedom. No red tape. You'd be leading your own team, setting the direction on major accounts. And the salaries, well, let's just say it's where it should be. A flush crept up my neck, not from embarrassment but from the shock of being seen so clearly. Valued. Not because of what I represented to someone else. Not as a sister, a daughter, a seat filler, but because of what I could do. What I had already done. What I was capable of. I felt something shift inside me, something deep and quiet like a door opening. Natalie reached into her bag and pulled out a card, sliding it across the table toward me. "Let me know if you're interested. I can get you in for a meeting by the end of the week." I took the card. My fingers trembled slightly, but not from nerves. From something else. From the recognition that this moment, this offer, this acknowledgement, was the kind of thing I had spent years hoping to hear from the people closest to me. And now it had come from someone who owed me nothing. Someone who saw my work for what it was. Someone who didn't need a holiday dinner or a baby announcement to recognize my value. We talked a little longer, catching up on mutual friends, old professors, the evolution of the design world since college. But the whole time I held the card between my fingers, running my thumb along the edge like it was a talisman. When we finally stood to leave, she hugged me again, warm and unhurried. "I'm really glad I ran into you," she said. "Let's not lose touch this time." As I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the city buzzing softly around me, I looked down at the name printed cleanly on the card. Natalie Vargas, Executive VP, Omnivault Media. And underneath it, a line that made something in my chest ache in the best possible way. "We shape what people remember." For the first time in a long time I felt remembered. And more than that, I felt real. The restaurant where I met Lauren was quiet, tucked into the corner of a side street in Old Sacramento, dimly lit with exposed brick walls and heavy wooden tables that made conversation feel more like confession. We sat near the back, away from the bar and the soft hum of other diners, and from the moment I slid into the seat across from her, I felt the weight of the last few days settle between us. She didn't ask how dinner with my family had gone. She didn't need to. She just looked at me for a moment, searching my face the way only someone who's known you long enough to recognize the difference between tired and defeated can, and then she said, "Tell me what you're going to do." I breathed out a laugh, low and quiet, and shook my head, swirling the wine in my glass without drinking it. I looked around the restaurant. All those people talking in hushed tones, living their lives, not realizing that this moment, this decision felt like a pivot point. Then I looked back at Lauren and said it clearly, calmly, without flinching. "No more humiliation. No more chasing approval. No more waiting to be invited to tables I've outgrown." She smiled slowly, raised her glass and clinked it gently against mine. Finally. The next morning, I walked into Omnivault's downtown office with my portfolio under one arm and a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Not the kind of false bravado I used to wear like armor in underfunded pitch meetings or rooms full of men who barely glanced up from their phones. This was different. This was rooted. Earned. I knew what I brought with me. Years of strategy, art direction, leadership, late nights, tight turnarounds, impossible clients, impossible saves, team building, brand storytelling, vision. Real work. Real results. The interview panel wasn't small. Natalie was there, of course, along with the CEO and 2 senior partners. But instead of trying to impress them, I found myself simply speaking. Explaining my process. Showing my work. Describing how I led my team through a campaign launch in 6 weeks that should have taken 12. How I reframed a failing rebrand into one of the agency's highest performing rollouts of the year. I didn't apologize for being ambitious. I didn't soften my tone or round off my edges. I spoke like someone who knew her worth because finally I did. When the offer came through 3 days later, I opened the email in my living room and just stared at the number for a full minute. It was $65,000 more than I was making at Vision Spark. A private office, my own creative team, full control over campaign direction, and a relocation stipend if I needed it. Though by then I had already made the decision to move. That same afternoon, I toured a 2-bedroom apartment in River Point, high above the riverbank with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the skyline that caught the sunset like it was made for me. The ceilings were high. The kitchen was new. The light was soft and constant, the kind of light that makes you want to create something even on a bad day. I signed the lease before the sun went down. The next morning I woke up early, stood barefoot in the middle of my empty new living room with the keys still warm in my hand, and let myself breathe it in. The silence, the possibility, the proof that I didn't need a seat at their table. I had built my own. I had filled it with everything I had earned. And this time I was the one who got to decide who sat beside me. I sat on the floor of my new apartment, my back against the cold kitchen cabinets, legs stretched out across the untouched hardwood, and the last of the moving boxes still stacked near the front door. The apartment smelled like paint and fresh wood polish, with faint traces of cardboard and new beginnings. I had opened the windows just enough to let in the breeze off the river, and the late afternoon light fell across the floor in long golden stripes. My laptop rested on my knees, and for the first time in a long while, I felt no hesitation as I opened my social media and began to type. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't want it to be. Just a short post, simple, direct, and honest. A photo of my new office at Omnivault, the skyline glowing through the glass, and a caption beneath it that read, "After years of hard work, long nights, and more coffee than I care to admit, I'm proud to announce I've accepted the role of creative director at Omnivault Media." A new chapter begins and I'm ready for all of it. Within minutes, the responses started pouring in. Former classmates, old coworkers, designers I hadn't spoken to in years, even clients from past campaigns. All of them reaching out, liking, commenting, sending messages. You deserve this. Knew it was only a matter of time. Incredible news, Maya. Proud of you. The screen glowed with hearts and words of support. People tagging others, resharing the announcement, asking about future collaborations. Every new notification reminded me of just how far I'd come, and that the people who truly saw me had always been watching, even if they weren't sitting at my family's dinner table. But from my family, silence. No message from my mother. Nothing from my father. Not a single word from Alex. Days passed. The post continued gaining traction. I hit over 200 comments, my inbox filled with connections and invitations, but still nothing from the people who had watched me grow up, who should have been the first to say, "We're proud of you." Finally, Rachel broke the silence. A message. Just one. Saw your post. Okay. That was it. No, congratulations. No, well done. Just 2 words, clipped and almost sterile, like acknowledgement was a debt she resented having to pay. I stared at the screen for a moment, not angry, not even surprised. Just strangely still. Because the truth was, I didn't need their applause. I wasn't waiting for it anymore. I had spent years folding myself into quieter versions, softening my ambition so it didn't outshine what they valued. I had minimized my success, hoping they would feel more comfortable, hoping they might love me better if I didn't make them feel small. But this new chapter, this version of me, had no room for shrinking. I closed the message without replying. I didn't check for text from my parents. I didn't refresh out of habit. I didn't reach out first to ask if they'd seen it. Their silence wasn't new. It was just louder now that I had nothing left to prove to them. That evening, I stood barefoot on the balcony, a glass of wine in my hand and the sound of the river just audible beneath the city. The buildings across the water were lit with evening gold, their reflections trembling on the surface like something alive. I felt weightless and grounded all at once. They could ignore me. They could pretend none of it mattered. But I was still here. In my new apartment. In my new life. In a place I had carved for myself with my own hands. And for the first time I felt the deep, unwavering truth of it settle inside me. Their silence no longer had power over me. I had stopped needing permission to feel proud. The message from my mother came on a Wednesday afternoon, blunt and worded like an obligation dressed in concern. We expect you home for Thanksgiving. No more avoiding family. It's time to be present. I read it twice, once with a rising wave of irritation and again with a strange calm, like watching someone knock on a door that had already been locked for good. I sat at my desk in my office at Omnivault, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, the city stretching out in soft outlines behind the glass. I looked at the message again, but there was no warmth in it, no curiosity about my life or interest in how I was doing. Just an assumption that I would drop everything to perform my role. The one they'd written for me long ago. The quiet one. The agreeable one. The one who sits in the corner and doesn't make things complicated. I didn't answer right away. I waited. I let the stillness fill the space instead. Later that evening, after I'd wrapped up a team meeting and finalized our next campaign milestone, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop and booked a flight to Maui. Direct. Window seat. A 5-star hotel with white linens and a balcony overlooking the ocean. I chose the dates carefully, November 23rd through the 30th. The entire week of Thanksgiving. The next morning I finally replied. This isn't a phase. This isn't a whim. This is a boundary. I'm not coming for Thanksgiving. I no longer accept being treated like a placeholder in my own family. I've built a life that makes sense to me. I won't step backwards to play a role that never fit. I wish you a peaceful holiday. I didn't dress it up. I didn't soften it with emojis or a trailing apology. I said exactly what I meant and I sent it without trembling. What came next was a flood. The family chat, the same one that had been silent when I shared the biggest news of my career, exploded. The tone shifted so quickly it felt like emotional whiplash. First came the confusion. Wait, are you serious? You're not really skipping Thanksgiving, right? Then the disbelief. Who even spends a holiday alone on a beach? This is so out of character for you. And then came the guilt. You're being selfish. You're hurting Mom. Everyone's talking about this. She just wanted her whole family together. I hope Hawaii is worth more to you than your own blood. I didn't answer a single one. I muted the thread after the 37th message. I scrolled through them with the same detached curiosity I might bring to old text messages from an ex, familiar but irrelevant now. Each word they sent only proved how deeply they misunderstood me. How much they believed that my value lay in my compliance. That my presence was something they could demand on cue, and that my silence until now had meant acceptance rather than exhaustion. Thanksgiving morning, I woke to the sound of waves outside my window and the soft rustle of palm fronds moving in the breeze. I stepped out onto the balcony barefoot, coffee in hand, and let the warmth wrap around me like a second skin. Below, the beach was nearly empty, the ocean wide and endless, humming with something ancient and steady. I watched the horizon for a long time, thinking not about what I had left behind but what I had chosen. I spent the day swimming, reading, walking along the sand until the sky turned gold and then soft purple. No timelines. No small talk. No smiling through gritted teeth. Just space. Just air. Just peace. Back home, I knew there were probably more messages waiting. More guilt. More passive-aggressive silence. Maybe even the performance of hurt because that was easier for them than reflection. But I didn't open the chat. I didn't carry their disappointment with me. They could call it selfishness if they needed to. But I knew the truth. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It was the quiet, powerful act of choosing myself. I was sitting in my apartment one evening, the kind of quiet night I had come to cherish, when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number right away, but something made me answer it. The voice on the other end surprised me even more than the call itself. "Hi Maya. It's Jordan." For a second I didn't respond. Rachel's husband had never once called me directly. He was always pleasant in person but distant, polite in the way people are when they've chosen a side and don't want to get involved in the rest. Hearing his voice now, uncertain but sincere, caught me off guard. "I hope this isn't a bad time," he continued. I've been meaning to say something since that dinner. I should have said it sooner." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "That night," he said, "the whole setup, putting you at the kids' table like that, it wasn't right. It wasn't fair. It wasn't just awkward or unfortunate. It was humiliating. And I saw it. I did. I just didn't say anything, and I should have. I went along with it, and I'm sorry." His voice was steady, but I could hear the discomfort in it. Not the kind that came from guilt alone, but the kind that comes from finally acknowledging something you can't unsee. "I don't know what Rachel was thinking," he went on. "Or maybe I do. But the truth is, you deserve to be at that table. Not because you're family, though you are, but because you're a grown woman who's earned her place more times than most of us combined." That night made that clear. And I'm sorry we didn't show that to you. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I had stopped expecting this kind of honesty from anyone in my family. It felt like a crack in the wall, small but real. "Thank you," I said finally, and my voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. "I appreciate that." After we hung up, I sat still for a long time, not trying to analyze it, not trying to decide what it meant for the future. Just letting the moment exist on its own. The next day I found the email in my inbox. It was from Rachel. The subject line was just my name. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting something cold, calculated, maybe an attempt to smooth things over without really saying anything. But the first line stopped me. "I've been meaning to write this for a while. I just didn't know how." It wasn't long. Rachel was never one for long-winded explanations. But this time her words felt different. Less filtered. Less guarded. "I saw your post. And not just the picture, not just the caption. I saw what it meant. And I realized something I probably should have understood a long time ago. I've been jealous of you." She didn't dress it up. He didn't pretend. "You've built something real. You chased what you wanted. You created a life that's yours, not one someone else expected you to live." And I guess a part of me resented that. I didn't know how to name it at the time, so I minimized it. I diminished your wins. I called them hobbies or flukes or lucky breaks, anything to avoid looking at my own regrets. There was a pause in the body of the email, a space before the next paragraph began. "I love my family. I love my kids. But there's a part of me that wonders who I would have become if I had chosen differently. I've never said that out loud. And I think the way I treated you was my way of trying not to feel it." She ended simply. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of that. And I hope you know, you've always been more than enough." I read the message twice, then once more. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone in my family didn't just acknowledge my existence. They acknowledged my pain. Not as an inconvenience or an overreaction, but as something valid. Something real. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I just sat there in the quiet, watching the sun begin to fall behind the skyline, and felt something inside me finally, quietly begin to unclench. Not everything had changed, but something had shifted. For the first time the silence had broken. Not through confrontation, not through drama, but through truth. And in that truth there was space to breathe. When I agreed to meet Rachel, it wasn't a decision I made lightly. I sat with the idea for days, letting it stretch and settle in my mind, testing whether I was doing it out of habit, that old ingrained reflex to mend what others broke, or because I truly wanted to open something back up. But the truth was, after her email and Jordan's call, something inside me had shifted. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but softened. I didn't want to keep carrying around the shape of a family that had never really seen me. I wanted to see what was possible if we tried again, this time honestly. We met at a quiet cafe near the park, the kind with wide windows and soft music, where the clatter of plates and low hum of voices created just enough background noise to make hard things easier to say. She was already seated when I arrived, hands wrapped around a mug, her face unreadable but open. I took a deep breath and sat down across from her. She started to speak, but I lifted my hand gently. "Let me go first." She nodded and I began. "It wasn't just one dinner," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It wasn't just the kids' table or the macaroni and cheese or being left out of a toast. It was years. Years of feeling like no one asked who I was becoming. Like I had to fight for every inch of recognition while you were handed it before you even spoke. It was watching my work dismissed because it didn't fit into the shape of what our family understands as success. It was the silence after my promotion, the lack of curiosity, the way my life was treated like a detour instead of a destination." She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She just listened, really listened, her eyes never leaving mine. "I tried so hard to be patient with all of it," I continued. "To convince myself that if I kept showing up, one day it would shift. But it didn't. And I realized I was spending so much of my life trying to earn space in a room I'd already built for myself elsewhere. When I finally stopped speaking, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was full." She blinked, swallowed, and then said the only thing that could have mattered in that moment. "I hear you. And I'm sorry. It didn't fix everything. But it opened the door." A week later, she asked if I'd help her plan the baby shower. Not because she needed to. Rachel had always been meticulous, a one-woman committee who could organize an event in her sleep. But because for the first time she wanted it to be something we did together. Not performative. Not for show. Just two women, two sisters trying to find a new rhythm between them. We spent afternoons sketching ideas, debating over colors, laughing at ridiculous diaper cake tutorials, and slowly, wordlessly rebuilding something in the space between tasks. It wasn't forced. It wasn't sentimental. It was just real. A shared momentum, small but steady. The day of the shower, the venue was filled with soft light and pale green florals, handmade place cards, tall pitchers of lemonade, and a cake so perfect it almost looked sculpted. Guests arrived slowly. Friends, cousins, women from Rachel's neighborhood, co-workers with bright gift bags. The room buzzed with warm energy, and for the first time in years I wasn't standing on the outside of it. Near the end, after gifts were opened and laughter had settled into a gentle murmur, someone asked if we wanted to do speeches. Rachel turned to me, her hand resting lightly on her belly, and gave me the tiniest nod. I hadn't written anything. I hadn't planned to speak. But I stood. Everyone turned toward me, and for a moment, I just let my gaze move across the room, over the smiling faces, over my brother and his wife, over the table where my mother sat with her arms folded delicately in her lap, watching me with the careful neutrality she wore like a second skin. I cleared my throat and began. "I didn't expect to be standing here," I said. "Not because I don't love this family, but because for a long time I didn't know if there was space for me in it. Not really." A small rustle moved through the crowd, a polite shift in the room's posture, but I didn't stop. "I've spent years building something for myself. A life, a career, a home. And I used to wonder why it didn't feel like anyone noticed. But I've come to understand that sometimes, the recognition we want doesn't come when we want it. Sometimes we have to grow so fully into ourselves that the world has no choice but to turn and face us." I glanced at Rachel, who was watching me with something close to tears in her eyes. This moment, planning this with my sister standing here now, it means more than I can say. Because it's not just about welcoming new life. It's about making space for all of us to begin again. Not as who we were told to be, but as who we are. The room was quiet. Then slowly I heard clapping. It started in the back, then rippled forward until everyone was joining in. Even my mother. She didn't smile, not at first, but her hands moved, soft and deliberate. And in that one gesture I saw it, the smallest, almost imperceptible shift. Not an apology. Not understanding. But acknowledgement. It was enough. I sat back down, heart still beating hard in my chest, and Rachel reached out, wrapped her hand around mine and squeezed. Not hard. Just enough to say, "I see you." And for the first time in a very long time I believed her. The announcement came on a quiet Tuesday morning in June. The kind of morning where the city moves a little slower, where the air feels weightless, and the light spills across my desk like something gentle and deliberate. I was already in the office early, my mug still steaming, the inbox quietly filling with the usual rhythm of campaign updates and creative briefs. And then the email arrived. Subject line: "Congratulations, partner." I opened it, breath catching for a moment even though I already knew it was coming. I had been in the final review meetings, I had shaken the hands, signed the dotted lines. But reading it written out like that, official, simple, absolute, struck a different chord. Maya Kwan, partner, Omnivault Media. My name etched into the foundation of a place I had once only dreamed of entering. Within hours it spread. The announcement hit the internal bulletin first, then industry wires. My headshot, taken in that soft afternoon light in my apartment a few weeks back, appeared at the top of Omnivault's featured profiles. Then came the article in Sacramento Business Weekly, the kind with a headline that sounded like it belonged to someone else. From independent vision to industry leader, Maya Kwan named youngest partner at Omnivault. I stared at the page for a long time, my photo above a profile that detailed not just my titles but my impact, the campaigns I led, the teams I built, the shifts I sparked. It didn't skim. It didn't soften. It told the truth. I didn't post about it right away. Not out of modesty, but because I wanted the moment to be mine before it became anyone else's. But later that evening I uploaded the article link with a short caption. Proud of the work. Grateful for the journey. Excited for what's next. I logged off without checking the likes. The response came quickly, only this time not just from colleagues or peers or mentors from the last 10 years. This time my family noticed. Rachel was the first. "This is huge. You earned every bit of it," she wrote under the post. Then a text followed. "I showed it to Mom. She cried." I didn't know what to do with that at first. I read it and let it sit. I didn't push it away. I didn't chase it either. Alex called the next day unprompted. "I saw the article," he said. "Didn't realize you were the youngest ever." That's incredible, Maya. Seriously." There was something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Maybe ever. Not pity. Not obligation. Just pride. Even my father sent a message. Not a long one. Just a photo of the paper folded on the table, my face front and center, and the words, "We're proud of you, sweetheart." There were cards in the mail. A bouquet of flowers from an aunt I hadn't heard from in months. Even my mother, who had spent so long offering me practical suggestions disguised as concern, sent a handwritten note. Her script still the same, thin, looping, careful, but this time her words were simple. "You made your own way. And it's beautiful." And I was grateful. I won't pretend I wasn't. There was something deeply moving in being seen, not as someone trying to prove herself, but as someone who had already arrived. But the difference now was that I didn't need it. Their recognition, however sincere, no longer dictated the way I measured my worth. My success didn't hinge on whether they clapped loudly enough or responded on time. The self-respect I carried wasn't borrowed from their approval. It had been built over years, forged in silence, in small victories, in lonely nights spent choosing myself again and again. When I walked into my office the next morning, the brass plaque with my name already on the glass, I didn't feel like someone who had finally earned her place. I felt like someone who had always belonged, who had simply stopped waiting to be told so. I sat at my desk, opened the next campaign file, and smiled. The world was watching now. But I wasn't performing. I was just continuing. The sun was low in the sky by the time I arrived at my parents' backyard, the air thick with the smell of grilled vegetables, charcoal smoke, and late summer grass still warm beneath bare feet. It had been years since I came to one of these August barbecues, years of excuses, scheduling conflicts, polite no thank yous. But this time something was different. I wasn't showing up to prove anything. I wasn't hoping for recognition. It came because I wanted to. Because the weight of old expectations had finally fallen off me, and I could walk into this space as myself. There was no kids' table this year. Instead, the yard was arranged with 2 long rows of folding tables pushed together, covered in mismatched linen cloths and surrounded by chairs of every size, from wooden dining room spares to plastic lawn furniture. Everyone was seated together. Children, cousins, parents, partners. No more quiet banishment to a corner. No more silent hierarchies made visible in table assignments. My father waved me over with a smile, not rushed, not distracted. Just warm. "There she is," he said as I approached, his voice full of something I hadn't heard in a long time, maybe ever. Pride, unguarded and genuine. He pulled out a chair for me himself. Not an afterthought. Not an empty seat at the edge. Right in the middle between him and my mother. "You still working with that media company?" he asked after a while as we passed dishes of grilled corn and cold orzo salad between us. "Omnivault," I replied. "Right," he nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "I saw that billboard on J Street last week. Looked sharp. That one yours?" "It was," I said, smiling, and he leaned back in his chair, whistling low under his breath. "Big stuff," he said. You always had that in you. Took me a while to see it. That's on me. My mother, who had been quiet so far, chimed in next. You know, she said, turning toward me, every time I mention your name to people at the club, someone always says, is that your daughter who made the campaign for River Arts? That was stunning. She didn't embellish. She didn't mask it as a compliment meant for someone else. She just let it land clear and direct. For a second I didn't say anything. I just let myself feel it. The strange and quiet weight of finally being spoken to, not like a child returning home, but like someone who belonged. Later, while I was helping stack empty plates on the buffet table, Alex came over. He didn't say anything at first, just hovered near the edge of the table, rubbing the back of his neck in that way he always did when something uncomfortable was brewing. I owe you an apology, he said eventually, low and direct. I looked up at him, surprised, but didn't speak. I've been a bit of an ass, he added with a small, crooked smile. Dismissive. Condescending. I've made little jokes about your work, you know, the whole graphics thing, and I told myself it was harmless. But it wasn't. You deserved more than that. You built something real. You've become someone strong. And I see that now. There wasn't any fanfare in his voice. No performance. Just truth. I nodded slowly, not needing more. Thanks, Alex. And that was enough. As the evening stretched into golden hour, the kids ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter echoing off the fence. Rachel sat near the fire pit, her hand resting on her belly, and waved me over for another helping of grilled peaches. My father handed me a beer without saying a word, just a small grin on his face. And my mother sat beside me later, asking where I'd bought my dress, how my apartment was, what book I'd been reading lately. Not as filler conversation, but because she wanted to know. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like a daughter returned for inspection or a guest playing a part. I felt like myself. Whole. Not defined by absence or rebellion or roles they'd written for me years ago. I wasn't the creative one they couldn't quite place. I wasn't the youngest. I wasn't the exception. I was simply Maya. No footnotes. No disclaimers. Just one of them. Finally. The lights were warm on my face as I stood at the edge of the stage, the kind of professional setup where the air feels charged just before the first word is spoken. My name was displayed in bold white letters on the massive screen behind me. Maya Kwan, partner and creative director, Omnivault Media. And below that, the title of my talk, Designing from the Inside Out, Building Identity Through Story. It was the closing day of the National Media and Creative Conference in San Diego. The room was filled with hundreds of people, colleagues, students, industry veterans, strangers, all of them quiet now, waiting. I took a slow breath. The moment felt big, yes, but not overwhelming. Not frightening. I was ready for it. I had lived this story. I wasn't performing it. I was sharing it. As I began to speak, the words flowed easily. I talked about creativity, about leadership, about carving out space as a woman in an industry that too often mistook quietness for weakness. I talked about building trust, not just with clients but with yourself. About what it meant to design something that could hold truth. I felt the rhythm of the room shifting with me, nods and stillness in all the right places. I was fully present. In command. But more than anything, I was at peace. Somewhere in the middle of my talk I saw her. My mother. She was seated near the back, partially in shadow, hands folded in her lap. She hadn't told me she was coming. I didn't expect her to be there. And yet there she was, eyes locked on mine, no distractions, no judgment, just a stillness that almost broke me. Her expression was different from any I'd seen before. She wasn't just watching. She was witnessing. When I finished, the applause rose in waves. It was loud, sustained, genuine. I stepped down from the stage into a small sea of hands and congratulations, brief words from strangers who had seen something of themselves in what I'd said. But through all of it, my eyes found hers again. She made her way to me slowly, her face soft and wet with tears. She didn't say anything at first, she just looked at me for a long moment, as though memorizing something she wished she had seen sooner. Then she reached out, touched my arm and spoke. I'm proud of you, she said, her voice trembling. I mean it, Maya. I was wrong not to see it earlier. I thought I understood strength, but I didn't. Not yours. Not until today. And I'm sorry for that. I nodded, not because I needed the apology but because I saw how hard it was for her to say. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't holding the old ache like armor. That part of me had softened quietly over months of choosing my own voice. Her words didn't arrive like water on dry land. They arrived like something I had already grown without. I smiled at her, not with triumph, not with pain, but with something cleaner. Clarity, maybe. It's okay, I said. I'm still proud of me. She exhaled softly as though some unseen weight had lifted between us. And in that silence I felt it. Not a grand reconciliation, not a rewrite of the past, but the quiet truth that I no longer needed her to name my worth. Respect wasn't something I had won like a prize. It wasn't something I had begged for or chased down. It had arrived because I had learned finally and fully to hold it for myself.